Hi, Nancy.
Good morning. How are you?
I am doing, oh, I've got some nerves.
Oh,
But
no, Jacob. You're such a natural. I'm so impressed with you. Besides, I have so much fun working with you. Every time I get to work with you, I'm like, oh, smiling because you're so fun to be around. So I appreciate you very much.
I appreciate that. I do. I did make some changes to the presentations, and hopefully that first initial point will be longer, and I changed the introduction. Hopefully, it's a little bit more interesting, more pertinent and apt. And I haven't had a chance to run through it all the way, so I'm going to keep an eye on the timer and make sure that it's staying in time.
Great. If there's something you're wanting me to do to give you cues or whatever, I mean, we've done that in other webinars where we, because it's hard to present and watch the timer. So, but I'll follow your lead on that. I think you're a lot better at multitasking than me. So you just tell me what you want me to do.
Okay. Right now, so I've got a piece of paper with just some little introduction notes on it. Welcome everybody. Thank you for your time. Reminder, we're recording. My name is me. I'm working with K-State Pollution Prevention Institute. I'm joined by my colleagues. Put together a webinar for this particular purpose. Here are goals and agenda. If any questions, put in the chat. Nancy will answer, consolidate for final Q&A session, and then we will start with a quick pre-session poll. And then from there, we'll go on through. I did consolidate all of the PowerPoints into one single gigantic slide, so it's easier for me to just use them.
Very nice.
And,
good idea.
Oh yeah, and I see Abby's here. I don't believe I made you, Abby, a co-host, but I will make you a co-host now, so you will actually be able to let people in. That would be very helpful.
And you might want to stop recording, Jacob. I don't know that you want this recording.
Could you go on ahead and start recording? And let me know once it has begun.
We are recording, and you can see that in the upper left-hand corner.
Gotcha. All right. Welcome, everybody. We are just waiting a little bit just to allow folks to enter if they're a bit late. We'll likely start at 1:05 or maybe 1:02. We'll see. Do you see a few more folks entering? Okay. All right. Well, it's a little bit before 1:05, but I'm not seeing anybody in the waiting room right now. So we'll go on ahead and get ourselves started. I know everybody's time is very valuable. So thank you for joining us today and welcome. Just as a reminder, we are in fact recording this webinar. We'll be sending out the recording afterwards, about a week after. My name is Jacob Larson. I'm a pollution prevention specialist here at the Kansas State University Pollution Prevention Institute, and I'm joined by my colleagues Nancy Larson, no relation, and Abigail Kraus. And so as Nancy had mentioned in the chat box, if you have any comments, any remarks, any questions, please do put them in the chat, and Nancy will be consolidating them and answering them, and we'll make sure to get to your questions. And of course, also, if you are not speaking, please have cameras off to help save bandwidth. And let's see here. Yeah, all righty. So this webinar, food waste webinar, stories and tools to help your school. We've put this together to, as the name implies, help schools out and help folks who are assisting schools on food waste. And we think it'll be really helpful. And so here is our agenda with some goals. Like I mentioned, helping schools out with reducing that waste. And so we'll have introductions, pre-session poll, the presentations themselves on why food is important. Then we'll have our speaker panel, and then we'll discuss frameworks and tools to reducing food waste, ending with the question and answer session and a final post-session poll. So by the end of this presentation, the goal is that folks, have a feel for food waste and have a good idea as to how to reduce it at schools. So yeah, please remain muted, keep distractions at a minimum, and we'll go on ahead and start with the first pre-session poll. Okay. All righty. There it is. It has started up. So go ahead and answer this. I'll give it about 2 minutes or so. And then after 2 minutes are elapsed, we will jump into the first portion of this webinar and discuss why food waste is important. All right, looks like we're at 1 minute. Got a few folks left to answer. Staying pretty stable, so we might just go on ahead and move on just to save time, because time is important. All right, thank you for answering that short little questionnaire right there. It looks like a decent number of folks are pretty confident, pretty happy with the amount of knowledge that they have on food waste, answering 3s, 4s, just a few 2s. And so hopefully we'll bump those 2s on up to 3s, 4s, and potentially 5s. All right, so food waste. Got to set the stage first. Why is it actually important? And so for those folks that answered pretty high on that pre-session poll, this will probably be a little bit of a more of a review as opposed to anything new, but it's still really good to go over this kind of information. So food, it's pretty simple. It's a very simple word, only 4 letters, but that word has so much connotation behind it, has so many emotions to it. And there are some foods that we absolutely adore, absolutely love, and there are some foods that we really, really hate. And there are some foods that give holidays that really define a holiday, that can define memories and can define moods and emotions. And across all of these different foods, though, they get trashed, right? So, and we've all been there. We've all, had some food waste at home, whether it's some grapes got moldy or a jug of milk expired, or, we just might have gotten full and not finished a plate, and hey, you don't have anything to take food back home with. And so we've got some waste. But if we want to understand this food waste at a large scale across a state, across a region, across a country, or the entire world, we have to have a common understanding of what waste is. We need to define what waste is. So, what is waste, right? And the kind of fun thing here is that there's no real true one single agreed upon definition for what waste really means. So for instance, the term food loss can mean 2 different things between what the USDA considers it and what the colloquial definition of food loss is as provided by EPA in their From Farm to Kitchen report. Same thing for food waste. It can take 2 different meanings depending on what organization is talking about it. And so because I really like figures, I added a figure off to the right here that kind of describes, what this term is to how that food waste is actually managed. And so when I say food waste, usually what I'm referring to is actually EPA's definition of food loss and waste, which is pretty much anything that is intended for human consumption that is not actually eaten by a person. So really very, very, very broad. But I don't really want to dwell too terribly long on this particular situation on different definitions, though, because it gets really into the weeds. And ultimately, regardless of what definition you really are going with, we generate a lot of waste. And that's across so many different studies and so many different reports. We have a lot of waste. So how much is actually being generated, though? In the USDA and EPA, they do in fact agree, despite having different definitions, that about 30 to 40% of our food is in fact wasted in some form or fashion. And so that estimate ranges from 161 to 335 billion pounds a year, which I did some little math on a calculator, and it comes out to about 2 pounds a person per day. And so there's a figure that I've seen around that's that this amount of waste is actually enough to fill the Rose Bowl stadium every single day, which is kind of wild when you think about it. So if you go on a more of a personal note, though, if you're going to a grocery store and you're picking up some grapes or picking up some donuts, picking up what have you, and you're trying to go home and you make it to the door and all of a sudden, oh no, you drop half of it. Well, shoot, that's pretty much what's happening across our food system. But where does that waste go when it's actually generated? Across, it's across the different generators of waste that are not industrial. So, for instance, waste that's generated at schools, at home, at hospitals, at the farms. By and large, those are going to landfills or to an incinerator. About 2/3 go to the landfill and incinerator. So we've got some numbers right here from EPA's 2018 Wasted Food Report that really dives into where this waste is really going. It's pretty wild there that more than half of it actually goes to a landfill. And as you might imagine, we don't really want that to occur. We want more of the more of that food to actually go to donations or to animal feed, or simply not exist in the first place. And so over on the right here, I've got this EPA's food recovery hierarchy, which is a fantastic figure that shows what food how you should actually really truly try and handle that food waste. So as you might imagine at the very top, you don't want it in the first place. And then if you do have it, try and feed hungry people, try and feed some animals. If you can't do those, continue on the line until you get to landfills and incinerations as the last resort. So we want to go up that triangle, up that hierarchy, reduce that landfill, reduce waste. So how much food, you might be wondering, is actually in the landfill, though? Well, the fun thing is that the majority of waste that's actually going to these municipal solid waste landfills is in fact food at about 24%. And that has an impact. And what is that impact, though? Well, if you consider that food and agriculture consumes 16% of US energy, 50% of land, and about 2/3 of fresh water, you can see that, if we're wasting 30 to 40% of our food supply, there is in fact a fairly significant impact. So on land, for instance, the food grown on land that is then wasted is about 140 million acres. For reference, Kansas as a state has 52.7 million acres. So it's pretty substantial, the amount of land. So it's California, New York combined. And this has implications where habitat loss occurs, and that can lead to biodiversity loss. That's a problem. If we go on to water, we're using 5.9 trillion gallons of water to grow the food that is wasted. And that is enough water for 50 million American homes each year. And just for reference, Kansas has 1.5 million housing units, which has the impact that it can exacerbate drought. And just as a fun little aside on this water, it's the amount of water that goes into the products is significantly higher than a decent number of people really expect. And so just wanted to include this slide here because it really is quite something when you see how many gallons go into each of these different products. But moving on, though, the amount of fertilizer that's used to grow wasted food is enough to grow a year's supply of plant-based foods for us to eat. The amount of energy, more than enough energy to power 50 million homes. And then, of course, that also has implications on greenhouse gas emissions, which are equivalent to 42 coal-fired power plants here in the US. So altogether, there is a decent amount of impact on the environment that all of this food waste actually, creates. And beyond that environmental cost, though, there's also a social cost. So according to Feeding America, as of 2020, the overall Kansas food insecurity rate is about 9.7%. So roughly 1 in 10 people here in Kansas face hunger. When you look at kids, though, that goes higher, about 14%, or 1 in 7 kids are hungry. And the thing is that the amount of calories in our surplus food is enough to feed all of America's food insecure folks. You can see that in this figure in the middle, which is taken from EPA's From Farm to Kitchen report. And just as a reminder on the term surplus food, you can see on the far right what that entails is that's food that goes either to the sewer, to the landfill, that's not harvested, that's incinerated, that's composted, that goes to animal feed. It encompasses the whole gamut, essentially. So beyond socially, though, there's also, of course, an economic impact. So as I'm sure everybody is well aware, food prices have been a little bit high. I know of at least one school that has had to stop buying blueberries, actually, because the cost of them had actually risen so much. And so Refed, who is a fantastic resource, by the way, I'll talk about them later, they have an estimate for the amount of the cost of surplus food from 2019 alone was of being $408 billion. For Kansas specifically, it's $3.68 billion, though, like, as I mentioned earlier, with higher prices, it's probably higher than that value now. So saving money, you try and reduce waste to save some money. And you can see on the right here, this is Refed's capital tracker tool. And you can see across the years, more and more money has been going into trying to stamp out this food waste issue because folks are realizing it is a pretty substantial issue. So it's relevance, though. So the US as a whole actually does have a goal to cut down food waste by 50%. And as a whole, we're looking at two different baselines to accomplish that, either looking at EPA's baseline or USDA's baseline, which are two different ways. And how, though, does this have anything to do with schools? Well, there's a fantastic study that the World Wildlife Foundation actually carried out back in 2019 that took place at 46 different schools across 8 states. And what they found was that the amount of food waste generated from the students, not from in the kitchen, but just from the students alone, the average was 39 pounds of solid food waste per student per year and 29 cartons of milk per student per year. And the cost of this was $1.7 billion every school year, $9.7 million per day. And schools, as we know, are strapped for cash as it is. So once again, try and reduce waste can help save some money. Now, it's important too to look at who is actually generating this waste. And right now, schools are considered, from my understanding, food service. You can see here that that's not necessarily a major portion of the generator of food waste, especially when you consider that food service includes other entities, not just schools. But schools are in a very, very unique position where you guys, they're students. And by engaging students, you can engage their families in a sense through the students. And so you can indirectly reach out and impact the major generator of food waste, and that is the residential side of things. So with that said, in the end, food waste really, truly does matter, and it has value. And despite the value that we might associate with it, we do lose a good majority of it And the majority of the food that we do end up losing ends up going to the landfills. And that costs us in the environment, in our wallets, and in our neighborhoods. And schools are in a position that they can try and help not only the food service side, but also through the consumption side. So with that said, we've got three panelists here, three speakers who will discuss their schools and what they're doing to reduce food waste. So joining me is Neal, who's the Shawnee Mission School District's Chief of Early Childhood Education and Sustainability. We have Leilani Gray, who is the Director of Admissions, Diversity, and Social Responsibility at Topeka Collegiate. And then we have Jessica McMinn, who is the Food Services Director for OPA Food Management at Baxter Springs Schools. All right, glad everybody could join me for this. And just as a reminder, our goal is to try and help schools reduce waste. So let me get situated with my screens here and we will begin. All right, so first question. Why did you start on your food waste journey?
Well, I'm happy to start. I'm Neal. I'm with the Shawnee Mission School District, and in our district, our journey really began as a grassroots effort. It technically, I think, kind of got a little catalyst with our food service team. In 2007, they actually eliminated styrofoam, and so that moved most of our containers to things that were recyclable or compostable. But then in 2008, we had two elementary schools that decided they wanted to sort of go down the path of food waste composting. They were elementary schools. So I think that's really kind of inspiring. And so they began, and then they started sharing their story through the school district and through our PTA organizations, and it sort of grew legs. And then in 2016, through a strategic planning process for our district, the district actually put sustainability as a goal within the strategic plan. A position was created to oversee that. And so from there, then by 2016-17, all of our facilities across the district then came on board. And we have roughly 47 facilities district-wide who continue today to be composting in our cafeterias. And that includes our administrative center here.
I'll go next. So we're a very small school, and it's in my title actually, social responsibility, because I do have a sustainability background. I've been a part of the school for 2 years, and sustainability is just something near and dear to my heart. So it aligned with some changes on our campus as far as we had an old food service manager retire. And so we just kind of, just really did something innovative and changed it all. And to be mindful of food waste, because we know it's our responsibility to be able to be mindful of that, to make the biggest impact. So we put it at the forefront of, some of the things we do. And also being so small, we can make changes fairly fast. But we also do a lot of things on campus. So we can make the changes, but just putting them in place is another thing. But we also are taking sustainability on in other efforts, but we know how much food waste occurs in our community and in our state. And we feel this is a good place to start.
So my journey started with cost issues, just, trying to get food cost in line and staying within a budget. You don't realize how much money you're throwing away when you're throwing that food away. So that's how our journey started here in Baxter and across our company with OPA.
Looks like I was muted right there. Thank you for sharing you guys' origin, so to speak, for starting sustainability. So when you'd initially started, how do you feel students reacted? And this is an open question as well, so whoever does want to go first.
Sure. So
Oh, good.
go ahead, Leilani, you take it.
Oh, well, it's the things that we kind of started doing. The students are really excited about it because we have some of the students leading this process. We were teaching it out to our 8th graders, which is the oldest children on our campus. And they were, teaching it out to the younger students on campus. And we hope to kind of continue that. It's when you see it, because when we did an audit, you can actually visually see how much waste, and we had the 8th graders helping us weigh the food and keep track of it. And then all the students were like very curious to see, what that number is. And they were kind of shocked. So, having them actually physically see the things and how much waste they're creating caused them to, make certain changes rather than choose the milk they're not going to drink. They didn't take it. So if you make it a learning thing, they were all over it. It's been really easy to motivate them to make different, to choose something different, change their habit.
Leilani, I would agree with that. And that's been in our district too. We've heavily involved students in the process, including when I mentioned the strategic planning process in 2016. We actually brought high school students together for a student summit. And they actually, we're fortunate in our area to have a lot of great partners. And so we had some professionals come in and talk about various areas of sustainability. And then the students established priority areas for our sustainability program, one of those being the efficiency and food waste composting component. And we've continued to, we've had schools where they've had assemblies to try to help teach students what to do, what not, what goes in which bin, and to help them with that. And we've also had the opportunity to have Jacob came out along with some of our partners here with our local county to come out and do some food waste audits and to train us so that then hopefully we can take that across all of those facilities just to continue to improve our processes and then hopefully to do some goal setting in the future.
When you guys came and did the food audit here in Baxter, it was apparent that really the food waste was with the kids, the plate waste. And so we've talked with several of the students, and truly making it offer versus serve at our school has helped tremendously. I think there's an old, everyone thought that they had to have a milk with their tray, and they don't. And explaining and talking with the kids, milk is a choice. You do not have to have milk. You have to have your fruit or your vegetable, but everything else is an option. And explaining to them how to build their plate has been our biggest reduction in food waste.
So you've mentioned offer versus serve, and then everybody has also mentioned doing audits as well. Are there other tools that you have each used at your schools that you feel that are very helpful as well?
Yeah, for us, it's that we have a waste log and we write down every single thing that goes into the trash can. And then, I take it one step farther and I cost out that at least weekly, if not daily, checking to see how much money we are throwing away. I haven't shared that with the students, but I've shared it with my staff and kitchen managers. And then that helped them become more aware of what they're doing. They think it's maybe just a few things here or there, but when you actually put a dollar amount to it, it makes them realize, wow, we got to control this, especially with the cost of goods right now, at home and in our jobs. That helps. We have a production record that we do every single day. Writing it down seems to bring the most awareness to everyone involved.
Yes, so our lunch program at our school is optional. Kids, they have to opt out of our of our food service, our lunch program. But what it does is it helps us, and it's by semester. So we know, we also use a catering service. And so we know exactly how many meals we need to serve between grades and faculty and staff. And so it's very specific, and we only, our caterers only prepare 5 over just in case someone left their lunch, so no one goes hungry. But it's very down to the person to make sure they're not making more than they have to. It's also choice. And another thing that, 2 other things we do is we involve students in our meal planning. So, because we would love for them to eat, you know, of course, fruits and vegetables, but we help them look at, you know, we ask them their thoughts on our menu, and we've made some adjustments because we do want them to eat the food. And then, you know, the other thing we also do, the new tradition we have is every Friday, we have smorgasbord day. And we always have, like, you know, a soup with whatever was left over. So on every Friday, we just kind of eat the leftovers. And that's been kind of fun because kids get to choose everything that we had from the week.
We do similar engagement with students around meal planning and food tasting of new recipes, even just to get feedback. And I agree with you. I think that's got a lot of buy-in from them and helped us. We've also, our food service team also adjusted to an offer versus serve, and is constantly looking at that as well. We've instituted back after the pandemic. We weren't able to do this for a while, but we put back in a share table for some items that where they can go and other children can pick those up. They're limited, of course, to some very specific things that we're able to do that with. And then from a data perspective, I think we're looking at a more global platform potentially down the road. And it does have a waste component, but right now, to track other components of waste, we don't have a really good way to do that, but it's the ARC platform. Our district is in the middle of doing some bond building. And so some of our new buildings we're looking at trying to certify through LEED. And so the ARC platform is a potential option for us there.
Make a good point there, Leanne. I know there's a pretty substantial difference in size between organizations there. So there's something that I've seen before, and I'm curious about providing a visual of food. So I believe, Jessica, this is something that you guys do down in Baxter, at least in the middle school, I believe, where you have a plate that's been prearranged to show students their options as they come in. Is that something you feel is useful, is helpful?
I don't know if it's really useful on the food waste, possibly, but you know, it just displays their options of what they can get before they come through the line. And then, you know, also just that full variety of a fruit and vegetable bar so they can choose what their sides are really helps. So they don't throw it away. They get to choose what they want to eat, just like when they go out to eat with their parents or at home, they get to build their own plate, you know?
Absolutely. So it sounds like everybody has really good support through the students. Students are interested, students are engaged. How about when it comes to admin? How is that looking? In a sense, is there pretty good support?
So yeah, I mean, we're a small school. I'm a part of the admin leadership team, and so I'm managing it. And you know, the way, and my head of school is, you know, working, you know, partnering with me on this. So everybody is really, one, we want to, you know, reduce our food waste, but we also save money. And that also has our board excited about what we're doing as well because of that. But, you know, when you save money, everybody's, you know, very interested in continuing to do what we're doing.
We also enjoy strong support. I think having put it into our plan and articulating it that way. We've also, once we had the student summit, we had the students actually come to the board and present and share out their process and what those priorities were. And I think that the student voice can be really powerful. And so we've enjoyed great support there across our administration. Some of our staffing challenges that we're working through, we'll get to challenges in a minute. Those have impacted us a little bit, but overall, we've received a lot of positive support.
So I've got a thought in the back of my mind I'm trying to formulate here. And that's, could you go a little bit deeper on the students that had come to speak at that event? How are they organized? How would that start?
So it was the students that were part of the summit. So we had students, we happen to have, we have 5 traditional high schools and an alternative high school in our district. And so we invited students from all of those schools along with some teachers, and that they facilitated. It was a day-long process where, again, we had people present information on different issues, and then they established priorities. And they came to consensus around what that was. And so then from that, we created a report, and then we made that presentation. We created a presentation and included the report and the presentation. And we just engaged students who are part of the process from across those schools to come and talk about there were 5 different priority areas. And then this particular time, we did it first in 2016, and then we reconvened in 2021. Just to reaffirm and to see were there changes. And really, most of the priorities were very similar. The order had shifted a little bit, but the one unique thing I think that was amplified across all of the students was the impact of health and well-being. And so we actually didn't create that as a priority area. We felt like that was an important thread that should be throughout. And so the students just came and talked about the process, and then they talked about the priorities and why they believe that those were priorities that the district should be engaging and investing in for the future.
Thank you for sharing all that. For Baxter and for Topeka Collegiate, are there specific clubs that you guys utilize to engage students and help them and direct them on sustainability matters?
For our school, because again, we're really small, the whole school is 142 students, grades pre-K through 8th, so very small. It's actually a whole school thing. I spent most of last year teaching the faculty and staff about sustainability from the ground up, so we could all have a shared language. And so a lot of the faculty and staff are doing things on their own in their classrooms in an age appropriate way, because I'm not in the classroom. So they have the freedom to do that within their classroom. And it just expands also to all the different various areas of our campus. Because, since the students leave, I want this to outlive me and my role. So I'm giving it to the teachers and having them decide how they're going to educate their students about sustainability.
Leilani, I think you make a great point there, and that's something that I think for us for future, if you want that to be sustainable, it really does have to be hooked in some way into the work that we do, which for us is curriculum and instruction in the classroom. And so we're looking at our standards across the board and trying to find the best place where some of these things can connect and fit in, so that it will continue to move forward, and it won't seem just like an add-on that we're doing. It will be part of, not only part of the culture and part of how we do business, but also a part of the learning process.
In Baxter, we partner with the kitchen partners with the FACS class, which is where they do cooking and that kind of thing, and they have a composter out back. So whenever they need scraps and the certain kinds of scraps that they need to make their compost work, we are constantly giving them all the greens and banana peels and everything that they can compost and paper towels and stuff like that. So that's fun. They have a student that comes and gets a bucket every day and takes it out there, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day.
Okay, so we've got audits offered for serve students. They're engaging faculty and staff that are on board. Are there certain methods to improving sustainability and to reducing food waste that each of you have tried but just did not work?
Well, I think if we wanted to get into challenges right now, I think for us, I would talk about the impact of the pandemic. For us, we were really on a great trajectory in terms of our schools being on board, increasing the amount of food waste, diverted, those kind of things. And then when the pandemic hit, there were so many things that schools had to do. The cafeteria lunch looked different. It was stretched out across multiple hours. Our custodial teams and food service teams were stretched really thin, as we were having trouble, and we continue to have some staffing challenges around just personnel to staff that. And so we never stopped doing it. We continued it all the way through, but it was really a balance of, it was not something that I was going to push, on the accelerator on, when I understood that the schools had so many other pressing issues that really needed to be addressed. So we continued through that, but during that time, our practice waned a little bit. And so this year we've really made a concerted effort to really kickstart that and jumpstart that back up. And we'll continue to build on that. We're seeing it come back. We still, and the students made an interesting, in their discussion, they reflected very honestly that as high school students, they did not do as good a job as they did when they were elementary or middle school students. And when we said, well, why do you think that is? They said, well, there were people standing right there. So we've continued to do consistent signage, but really for this to be, to really strengthen, I think it's going to take the students taking that on, either as green teams or eco teams, to give that leadership, because we just simply don't have the adults necessarily that we can just devote to standing at those stations. So I think those would be some of the challenges that I might articulate.
Thank you for sharing that, Leigh. Leilani.
Yes, some of the challenges that we face is just having one, we not doing too many changes at one time. I will cite COVID. Yes, we still are trying to get rid of some of the styrofoam and single-use products that we bought during COVID that is impacting our waste. So it's just really kind of hard because we're trying to make these changes, but we're also trying to use what we have, and we're still using some of that. Another challenge is, deciding, do we want more strict rules for people who bring lunch into our campus, which kind of, tiers our waste into a different direction with outside waste coming in that we don't have control over. So deciding if we want to say, you have to use a single or a reusable, refillable bottle, in your lunch. Because I do know some schools that say, like, if you bring a lunch, please do X, Y, Z things. So we're deciding if we want to do that on our campus too, because that waste comes to us. And again, just when our classes of leadership transfer or graduate out, are we doing a good job of onboarding the next leaders? And so, we're kind of, and that's with faculty as well as students, is that a part of the onboarding process of our school, is educating our new leadership team. So we've experienced that once, so not enough time to know if it's going to be successful. And so those are the kind of, the challenging things, because of all the other things schools have to do, it kind of gets pushed a little further down on the list of the things that we need to do for our students. So, and the grown-ups end up doing it instead of making sure the students are doing it.
How about you, Jessica? Are you facing some similar challenges in Baxter?
No, I mean, I think it's all about consistency, the more you make it a routine, then it becomes regular for everyone. In the beginning, it was a challenge because it wasn't consistent. It was an afterthought. But when you make it become a forethought and it's on your to-do list and you have to do it every day, then it just becomes routine and natural.
Some of the one of the challenges I heard had to do with barriers to time. So how for each of your different locations, that barrier for time, teachers having time, staff having time, how do you try and make it routine? How do you try and reduce that barrier?
Best policy is to, do it right along with them. It takes seconds to throw it in the composting bucket versus the trash can. So make the trash can more unaccessible and make the composting bin more accessible. It's seamless.
Any thoughts on that, Leah?
Well, I guess I would say I'm not 100% sure what response you're looking for, but I think we're encouraging. I would agree with Jessica on the consistency, and so encouraging all of our schools to make it part of like their back to school, like where we all teach routines at the very beginning of the year, and so teaching those routines and reviewing them at regular intervals. And doing that every year. So even with students that are returning, they still get a refresh of and reminder of what those processes are. I think our custodial teams have done a great job from an efficiency and time standpoint of working with the carts, queuing up carts so that it doesn't slow down the lunchroom process. And the same with our food service teams. They've been great partners. And so the quantity of time in terms of the human capital that it would take to monitor and to do that, that's really the struggle. But I think if you do these other things, if you encourage students, like while they're still seated, to go ahead and sort so that they're just ready to go by the time they get up there, I think that also helps that nervousness when you get there and you're trying to look at the signs and you're still not 100% sure. But if you think about that ahead of time, you're ready to go, and it kind of takes that out and makes it again like a really consistent routine for them.
I'll say in regards to time, I mean, we always make it work. Like some of the other panelists said, it just is about consistency. I know right now, since we're early in our processes, our custodial team is doing a lot more than they really should be doing, just to make it all happen and help us achieve our goals. But we do need to empower our students more and slow them down before they go different directions, and remind them that of the different sorting methods that they do have.
So right now, where do each of you feel you're at in terms of sustainability? Because from what I've gathered, COVID definitely set a few things back, at least for some locations. So do you feel that you're on the right path right now?
Yeah, there's always room for improvement, but I think that, getting there.
I suppose a follow-up question to that is what does that look like? What does that improvement in the future look like? Where are you trying to go?
Well, educating them more on why we need to do this, what that looks like for the future and future generations. What happens if we don't do this? And making it not, it's not optional. We have to do it to sustain.
I would agree. We just want to continue to try to improve our process, improve our participation. So I think I mentioned earlier, really looking at, can we go back to gathering some data district wide, and then setting goals with each of the schools, so that they can set a goal to, here's where you are, and try to improve with the next years. Also, continuing to find ways to connect it with our curriculum and our lessons, and make a little stronger connection there is something that I think we'd like to do in the future. And then working with like I said, we're very fortunate. We have great partners here. And so working with them to take the message, so it's not just in the school, but also taking that message out into our community. And I think students can help with that, doing some PSAs, not only for what they need to be doing at school, but also to share the information out with the community, so that, you had some really great statistics. And so students can sort of borrow from that, and use that to share within their own communities, so that their families and others start to think about how can they be part of that process.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just the kids on our campus, it's our entire community, and how they can positively impact their, various communities. So I'm super passionate about sustainability, and I just feel like we can only improve from here. I know that, just from my teachings of our faculty and staff about, United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, they've taken various goals and kind of just gone, their own directions with that. And our students, we have 8th grades doing Model UN and incorporating some of our sustainability development goals. And, we do have some improvements on our campus that are going to take place that will support our sustainability efforts, and leaning into more composting, and just we have an old campus, so just transforming it to be more conducive to our goals, and so just to outlast all of us. And so I feel really good about the direction that we're going in, and I hope we can continue that upward trajectory.
So I'd heard that there's also a movement for a grove of fruit trees. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So we are partnering with an organization called Giving Grove and Big Garden. So Giving Grove does community orchards. They're more they have more of a footprint in like Kansas City area, and they plant native fruit trees and nuts and other native bushes they're more dwarf trees, so they're a smaller size, successful to our zone. And so our community orchard hopefully will be planted in April, which is an extension of our sustainability efforts. And part of it is we get to use just a small portion of that, so it will offset some cost, but we do need to give it back to the community. So just helping with those less fortunate to give back and have them have access to fresh fruits is something that we're going to start in collaboration with our future garden.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Leilani, because I do think that goes hand in hand. One of our other sustainability priorities is around gardens and orchards as learning areas at our schools. And so we also are fortunate to have the Giving Grove. They have some fruit trees they planted here. We have an urban farm that's actually part of our culinary program, which is a high school related program, but they've also donated some fruit trees to some of our other schools. And then we try to have some community gardens and some whether it's a pollinator garden or a fruit or a vegetable garden at all of our schools. And the students really set, their goal was that every school should have some kind of learning garden or native planting at their building. And so we're working toward that goal.
So if you implement a school garden, ideally be able to pick some vegetables, fresh fruit, and potentially implement that into your meals. Are there any thoughts on allowing students to be involved in that process of designing those meals? Or kind of like a test kitchen, so to speak?
I think that's a great idea. Like for our urban farm, they do utilize the produce that comes out of that. And then they actually take it to farmers market where they actually sell salsas, jams, whatever it is that they're making. It's also used here in their restaurant. So they meal plan and the produce that comes out of that is part of those meals. They've also partnered with some other community agencies to have it was called Roots for Refugees, people that have come in to learn different techniques so that then they can be entrepreneurial or grow for their own families. And then the full circle piece that I think is so great about the composting is our compost partner will bring back when we need it. They bring back compost for us. And so I think that's that great lesson for the students. So when they put it in that container in their cafeteria, it goes out, it's in the compost row, it does its thing, and then it can come back and actually provide nutrient for the soil of the gardens that we have at our schools.
You just made me a little bit curious. Jessica, in the past, you'd mentioned that you also do some composting with FACT students. Do you know what happens with the compost there?
Yeah, they have a small garden right by the composter that they've just started, like tomato plants. They're easing into the different kinds of produce, but they make a lot of salsa in their classes. So they wanted to start with tomatoes, which is an easy plant to grow. But that is the ultimate goal, is to get the dirt for the garden.
All right, so I do see a question. I'm just looking at the chat a little bit, and I do see a question come through on the composting vessels. How are you doing your composting? What kind of vessels are you using?
I don't know what ours is. The FACS teacher actually got a grant for hers, and they came in and set it up, showed her how to use it. So I'm not sure what kind of brand it is.
You just said a very important word, grants. What kind of, do you guys have a good idea of grants available to other schools that they could use to improve their own sustainability or improve their own, reduce their food waste? Or I suppose, do you know of any resources for grants involving sustainability?
I unfortunately do not. I would love to know as well, but mostly we've been utilizing community partners, and some of the the new efforts on our campus has mostly been from just people that either we know are connected to the school and parents, and having some parent support, but that could only take us so far. So grants would be appreciated.
Jacob, whoever asked about the vessels that we're using, because we're a larger organization, we actually contract with a company, Missouri Organic happens to be our partner at this time that we contract with. And so we actually have poly carts at our schools that are picked up and taken by that vendor. And they scale by the number depending on whether it's elementary, middle, or high. With regard to grants, I think that's something we're always chasing and always looking for if somebody's got a great list. Certainly, I know, the EPA has provided, theirs are at larger scale, but sometimes if you watch there, that can be helpful. And I know we've been the beneficiary of other organizations that have received grants through there and been able to participate. And again, kind of to your point, some of our local county or different people will put out some grant opportunities. There have also been some grants for gardens and natural landscape. There's quite a few of those out there that you can find. But in terms of the food composting, that one that's a little bit different.
I'll kind of answer, I didn't answer the composting question. Our science, lower and middle school science are managing composting, and they are composting with vermiculture. So I think it's red wigglers that they are using in there. I don't know what type of vessel, it's just that they're using, but it's conducive for worms.
So I feel that ties into something I believe, Leanne, you mentioned back near the beginning on sustaining change and linking it to the purpose on education. Can you expand on how you incorporate those principles into classrooms?
So I think it's that's why we're looking at trying to strengthen that, to really drill into grade levels, to look at the standards, where they fit. Is it science? Is it health? To try to tie it a little more consistently, so it can be part of the lessons. Right now, certainly some groups do that, but it's more of a, each school does it a little bit differently in terms of incorporating like a learning garden. That's, if you were to look across all of our schools, it would be different. We have some consistencies like around water quality and those kind of things at middle school based on a grant that we actually participate in. And then in terms of the composting, that's more of a school-wide, because we do it as part of our practice. So right now, I don't know that I could say for sure that necessarily any classroom really owned that. You might have if the teacher had found that it fit with their curriculum. But I think that's a really important area that we want to try to build on. And some of our partners are really great. They have some educational pieces. Like I mentioned, our compost partner, they have educational materials that they're more than willing to share to help support that. So, and like our county partners are willing to come out and support. So I can't emphasize enough, if you've got partners in your community, find them, connect with them, and then work on it together.
Thank you for that thought, Leanne.
We are actually spending, so this summer, because we did change some of our core values to include social responsibility, as well as the, last year was, just a teaching out, to share and to have common language about sustainability. This summer, we're going to tear apart some of our, class programming to incorporate back some of our sustainability language that we learned. And so in hopes to, change what they're doing, not really change, we're just enhancing some of what they're already doing with some of our sustainability campus goals by grade level. So that's what each teacher is going to be working on that this summer to start back up next school year.
All right. Well, we are coming up on time here. So briefly for each of you, could you describe what the single best tool, I suppose, that you've seen so far for implementing sustainability in your school? What is that tool?
I'll go. I think the most important thing is getting the kids involved and excited about it. They're one of our most powerful motivators for us grown-ups to change. And so, giving them the tools and, having them help us because, we want this world to be the best place for them. And so, just working together with our kids will help us stay motivated and focused, as long as, as well as, kind of just infusing it into your core values and your mission and vision. And, so it will definitely be successful.
I agree. The student voice, it's their future. And so they have a powerful voice, and it's important to engage them in that. They're very passionate about it. It also helps if you can weave it through your organizational structure. I think that's been a key for us. We started as grassroots effort first, so there was some drive for that. But I think having the whole organization, having a lot of support behind you, and then again, partnering with area and regional organizations that have a similar interest and mission has been really helpful for us.
Jessica.
I agree with both of you guys. It's knowledge. Knowledge is power, and the more knowledge you give them, the more excited they get about it.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me and providing your thoughts and your inputs on this topic. It is a very, very important topic, as is. And yes, thank you. We'll go on ahead and move on to the next session here. And if we did not cover questions, we'll go on ahead and we'll still have that final Q&A at the end, and we'll be able to cover everything. Yes, once again, thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Leilani. Appreciate your input on these things. Whew. Okay, all right. So final little stretch here. What are some of the tools and frameworks that can be used for schools to reduce waste? This kind of ties into that final portion of that panel discussion. So where do you start? If you're like me and you start into this topic of food waste and sustainability, you start Googling and Googling and Googling, and you end up essentially slurping down data from a fire hydrant, because there's just so much information out there. So when I stopped to review some of the information, try and consolidate some thoughts, it ended up being a situation of information overload. It's as we've discussed, food waste is a major problem. And so there are major organizations and minor organizations out there all trying to help. And so on the left here, we've got just a few off the top of the brain organizations that are out there. So you've got EPA, FDA, USDA. We've got the United Nations FAO that also helps. We've got state agencies. We've got local universities out across the entire country, and not just here at K-State. And we've got, in each of these different organizations also have different resources that they provide people. And so, for instance, over on that right is just a word cloud from Refed of all their different solutions on ways to reduce food waste. And there's quite a bit there. There's a lot to wade through. And so what I'd recommend is taking a step back and taking a little bit of a deep breath and following a framework of sorts. And so here's an idea of a framework on knowing your situation, your options, and then acting on those options at a specific tempo. And so this is a Frankenstein's monster that's been essentially cobbled together from all sorts of different resources that I mentioned before. And so one of the really big important things on this, though, is that you repeat continuously. It's continuous improvement. It's just like a Six Sigma, if you're into that sort of process improvement structure, the plan, do, check, act, that kind of thing. You try and figure out what your situation is, find your options, act on those options, and repeat, and check how everything goes. So knowing your situation, what is that like? Well, there are three things that I'd suggest, and this is mentioned, every panelist had mentioned doing an audit, for instance. So Why is this important? Well, it's important because if you don't measure, if you don't have your eyes on the situation, how are you going to know how to manage it or what to manage? So doing an audit, you really get to see the waste that's being generated, and you can get an idea of the what, the when, the where, and the why of your waste. Going to Gemba, that's a particular phrase of essentially going out there and observing the situation. If you are a manager or if you're admin and you're trying to implement some food waste reduction strategy, go and see how the kitchen operates. Go and see how your trash hauler, your facilities people, how they handle waste. Understand the process, ask questions, be respectful, and see how everything really fits together. And you can identify barriers to successes and opportunities for successes in the future. And then, of course, you can always examine records. So if you are a kitchen that tracks waste, like Jessica, examine those records periodically. Look through them and identify trends. What is being wasted? Why is it being wasted? And if you don't track waste to that granular of a detail, it can still be helpful to examine your records from your waste hauler. You can see trends from that. Are there specific high points that you're generating a lot of waste or not? So know your situation, get some eyes on the waste so you can have an idea of how to manage it. So examine your records, go to Gemba and observe the processes and do an audit. And by doing this, kind of touch base on this, but you get an idea of the what, the when, the where, and the why of your waste, as well as identifying opportunities for improvement and barriers for them. So what do you do once you have those opportunities in your mind's eye? You have some options. You got to identify a few options. And there are a lot of providers, a lot of organizations out there that will provide a few of these, a few options to fix food waste, so to speak. And so while digging through the internet, I've come across a number of great resources. And so here are just a few of them. So of course, you've got EPA, you've got the USDA, the World Wildlife Foundation, ReFed, Green Schools, a number of different groups. And so some of them have toolkits. So for instance, EPA, their toolkit is a little bit broad. It's not specifically geared only to schools, but for communities, for institutions, industries, a number of things. But if you look through their toolkit, you'll find some of their options, some of their resources are applicable to schools. So they have a model recycling toolkit that you can dig through, that you can sort specifically for schools to find information on how to implement a recycling program for papers, as well as for food. There's a social marketing toolkit you can use to try and understand how to engage students or engage staff that might not necessarily want to improve on sustainability. They have contracts, procurements, best practices, as well as just a whole host of documents on ways you can try and reduce waste, and not only just food waste. USDA, similar situation, they've got some great guidance documents specifically for schools, as well as infographics that you can use, and a resource also on how you can actually perform a student-led food waste audit. The World Wildlife Foundation here also has a great toolkit. They also have a little bit of a grant program, actually. So this is touching base a little bit on that panel program. Now, right now it is closed, but they're planning, from my understanding, to reopen it this year, and it would help schools reduce their food waste, as you might imagine. And they, not only that, but they also have a whole slew of lessons and activities that you can use at your schools through all different grade levels, as well as some calculator tools. So, one last little mention on this is that they also have a very really cool report, deep dive report on plate waste at schools, that has case studies that you can review, as well as best practices and some ideas on overcoming barriers, such as not having enough time to work on sustainability. So they touch base on that. So if you have time, suggest checking that one out. So here are just a few of the little resources from those toolkits. So EPA, they do have this document, food loss prevention options for grade schools. Inside of that's do an audit, share tables, offer versus serve. A lot of the things that our panelists had touched base on. The USDA, they also have great infographic here discussing similar things. It's just very helpful, honestly. And so moving on over that World Wildlife Foundation waste report, I mentioned having case studies, and you can see here the different locations that they have case studies for. So Atlanta, Boulder, Columbus, Nashville. So if you're looking for options or suggestions for your school, you can go through these different toolkits and you can pull out these different resources. And having done that before, here are some very, very, very common options for K-12 schools they can do to reduce their food waste. Offer versus serve, for instance, using that share table. If you're in Kansas, I actually have the KDA SOP for doing the share tables according to protocol. Scheduling recess before lunch and extending lunch can reduce food waste by a substantial amount. I believe it's 30%, which is actually on an infographic on the previous slide. Having a donation relationship so that when you do have excess food, you have a pathway that you can allow that to move through. Educating students and staff, having people on board, having that leadership within the student body so that the rest of the students might be more interested and more inclined to follow through and reduce their waste and improve their sustainability. Track your waste. If you don't know what waste you're generating, how do you manage it? It ties right back into knowing your situation. And then at the very bottom here is using a bulk milk dispenser, which is something that's relatively new that I've not really seen in other resources, but because it's new, I wanted to throw it on here. All right. So when you do have all these different options in front of you, how do you determine which one is really the best one for you or for the planet in that fact? So the options that you identify, you really want to try and go higher up on the EPA's hierarchy. And I mentioned this in the very beginning on why food waste is important. But the higher you go, the better, ultimately. And the best thing is simply not have the waste. So if you have an option on if you have an option that ultimately reduces your waste entirely, that's probably a really good option. But does that option make sense and is it actually realistic, right? If it doesn't make sense, who's going to want to actually follow through on it? How is it going to be a change that can be sustained? So for instance, just on here, if you're at a public K-12 school that does the offer versus serve and you simply go purely a la carte, that's just not going to work. It doesn't make sense. It's not realistic. So those are important factors here. And if you are concerned about regulations through donation to food banks or feeding animals, such as giving food scraps to zoos or to a farm, there are some helpful resources out there on identifying what regulations there are, such as Refed's Policy Finder tool. KDA also has some guidance that you might, if you're curious, contact them. So after identifying your options, you can have a good path forward. You have an idea of a path forward to reducing your waste. And then it's important to follow through on that path at a tempo that's sustainable, because any change can happen incredibly fast. But how do you make sure that change sticks, right? And so our panelists had mentioned this as being a very important part to it. And so I'm touching base on this in that it's important to take your time. If you move too fast, you might be burnt out. And so when I was doing some Googling, when I was looking through all these different resources, a few things stuck out as best practices on making sure that organizational change sticks. And so ensure that your change makes sense and make sure that everybody who's a part of this change understands the underlying reason for the change. Why is it needed? It's important to establish buy-in. So the staff that are affected by whatever change is occurring, make sure that they feel heard and supported. And then, because all of this really combines together to make sure that everybody's on the same team and establish that buy-in. So another thing here is to make sure that when you are doing these changes, actually show some progress and consistent progress as well. So imagine, you've got this change going on and you hear no progress reports, nothing, it's invisible. People might fall off the bandwagon, right? So it's important that there are these consistent pushes of, hey, this thing is happening, we're making these progresses. And then it's important that when you do meet milestones or you meet some really important goal, that you celebrate it. You make sure that to reach out to the team that is impacted or helped make it happen, and you lift them up. Make sure everybody feels supported in your workplace. And that can really help with making sure that the change that is occurring sticks around. So take your time, act at a tempo that is sustainable and allows that change that you're making to stick. So it helps to improve chances of change lasting. And of course, with all of that said, it's important to go back through and repeat and learn your situation again. Were the solutions that you'd implemented actually implemented, and are they working as you expected them to? They might not, and it's important to reassess. So relearn. And if you met your goal, fantastic. Are you able to set a new goal? So know your situation, audits, going to Gamba, doing those observations, and looking through your reports. And then, of course, reviewing, going on to number 2, reviewing your options. Know your options. Are there other solutions that have come up that are now more feasible or make more sense? Or are there new technologies out there, new processes, new understandings, such as the bulk milk dispenser? Go back through, see what options there are out there. And then once you identify a good option, act on it at a tempo, at a pace that allows for that change to actually last, and make sure you have buy-in. And of course, repeat the cycle again. So that's a framework right there, alongside a number of tools and resources that are available out there. And then just a few last minute resources that you might be interested in are listservs and mailing lists to keep you up to date on these changes. And so I've attached just a few options there. So EPA's got a zero waste update, In the Loop with EPA, Sustainable Materials Management newsletter. Some of these aren't necessarily strictly food waste, but they're still sustainability, and they can potentially help you out. So in conclusion, food waste does in fact have a massive impact on the world around us, as I'm sure all of us know. Food waste can in fact be reduced, and people are in fact acting on it day after day. Money is going into it. It can be done. And an option to help you out is to use a framework so that you can implement changes at your own institution. It's important to stick to it, and just know that there are resources available to help. So with that said, that is the end of my presentations here, and opens on up to the Q&A section, as well as a post session poll. So are there any questions in the chat right now?
Jacob, I just see a comment here about KC and Green School Networks having great resources for districts. Those are state resources, so that's KACEE. And also EPA has great tools, and you showed some of those. Those are also linked and available on our website, which is, and you might just put up the contact information again, but on our website or through Jacob. I've also put Jacob's email in the chat. There was one question about wondering if any of the schools are composting in addition to food, paper, cardboard, and sawdust. And I don't recall that we necessarily address that question, but I wanted to put it out there.
I don't believe we did. Leanne, Leilani, and Jessica, can you touch base on that?
So we recycle cardboard. That's more, it goes more into our recycle than compost. We have some, and I would say paper is across. We do some composting of like paper napkins, paper food boats within that fall into that within the food service line. And then the sawdust, that's a great question. I can't answer that one right now.
Right now, we are just recycling cardboard. But our goal is to start recycling it next year within our new garden, our class garden system. And no sawdust.
We do some paper towels and paper boats in the composter. The composter is pretty small, so it limits what we can put in there when. And we recycle cardboard district-wide, I do believe. And we have a trades class that has sawdust that they use it for insulating flower beds and stuff like that.
That's awesome. And I'll just make the comment that, you know, what was just stated about putting it into the garden, right, is kind of a beneficial reuse, which is way above recycling, which takes energy, and certainly that is above compost, which composting is really just right above landfilling. So just a reminder there, composting is great. And I know someone said they're just going to start composting. That is great. But as Jacob shows you on this food recovery hierarchy, we always want to look at source reduction first, then feeding people and animals, then other uses, and then compost before landfill.
Good point there, Nancy. Yes. So if there are no other questions on this, though, we'll go on ahead and start that post-session poll.
Oh, I'll just share one thing.
Yes.
From some of the work we've been doing with you all and me teaching it out to the students, our middle school teacher is leading a repurpose room. And so they are still getting it organized, but the goal is they've took an area that just had stuff in it and they organized it, and they are going to have an online list of things that teachers can use for projects, as well as you could bring things in there for another teacher to repurpose. So we put them in different bins and they put it back there and catalog it for future art projects and whatnot. So it's our repurpose room.
That sounds like a lot of fun, actually. That's really cool. All right, well, going ahead and start this post-session poll right now. Launch, there we go. All right, so we'll let this post-session poll stay up 5 minutes, however long for folks to fill out. But if you do have any questions that are lingering in your mind, do send an email and we'll try and get you an answer. But once you're finished, entering this poll, feel free to exit and have a great rest of your day and implement some of these solutions, some of these resources at your own locations. So thank you for joining and have a good day.
And I'll just remind people that although on your screen you may only see one question, there are actually 3 questions on this last poll. And probably Jacob will even share the results if you have a second more to stay on. But these polls are really important to our work. So please just take a minute to answer them, because the results from these polls help us be competitive when we go to get grants and write for proposals. So thank you for your help with that.
All right, looks like everybody has answered on that poll. So I'll go ahead and share if folks are in fact interested, and then we'll go on ahead and here we go, share results. You can see that there were a few resources out there that folks are interested in using to make some changes in their own situations, and that by and large, we've gone up from roughly 3s and 4s to a little bit higher, more just on 4s. So that's really exciting. That's really nice. Well, thank you once again for joining, everybody, and hope it was helpful, that you had a good time. And please go on ahead and do some sustainability projects at your school. Start tackling some food waste and doing what you can, because this is an important topic. So thank you for your time, and everybody have a good one.